July 1, 1944. At the Hollandia Air Base in New Guinea, a flight of 4 P-38 Lightnings concluded their arduous 6.5-hour sortie over hostile territory, touching down on the scorched runway. As 3 of the pilots disembarked from their twin-boom fighters, their fuel gauges registered perilously low, indicating a mere 50 gallons, perhaps less, sloshing in their tanks. Yet the 4th aircraft, piloted by an unassuming 42-year-old civilian, remarkably displayed a robust 210 gallons still available, despite sharing the identical mission parameters, enduring the same atmospheric conditions, and operating the very same model of aircraft. This particular aviator had managed to conserve a staggering 200 gallons more fuel than even the most seasoned and highly skilled fighter pilots in the entire Pacific theater. The ground crew chief, his brow furrowed in bewilderment, peered intently at his fuel stick, then meticulously rechecked the reading, convinced of an error. For countless months, American airmen had rigidly adhered to the prescribed operational guidelines for these potent twin-engine fighters, maintaining a precise 2,200 RPM, utilizing auto-rich mixture settings, and meticulously following every procedure ingrained into them since the earliest days of flight school. They had been emphatically taught that any deviation from these established protocols would inevitably lead to catastrophic engine failure, asserting that operating over square, characterized by high manifold pressure coupled with low RPM, was tantamount to aerial suicide. However, standing on that sweltering New Guinea airstrip, confronted by fuel consumption data that utterly contradicted every tenet the Army Air Forces held sacrosanct regarding engine management, a profound and unsettling question hung palpably in the humid Pacific air. Could it be possible that the fundamental principles they had been taught about aviation were, in fact, entirely erroneous? The strategic checker game had unfolded for approximately 20 minutes when a gentle rap resonated on the screen door of their makeshift quarters. Colonel Charles MacDonald, deeply engrossed in the intricate dance of red and black squares, barely lifted his gaze, his mind still meticulously calculating potential moves, while the oppressive afternoon heat bore down relentlessly on their temporary command post at Hollandia Air Base. Across from him, Lieutenant Colonel Merrill Smith sat equally captivated by their rudimentary entertainment, a precious respite in this isolated corner of Netherlands, New Guinea. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. "Excuse me, gentlemen," a voice interjected, carrying an understated, yet undeniable authority that finally compelled MacDonald to direct his attention toward the doorway. A man of middle age, clad in crisp navy khakis that seemed impervious to the pervasive humidity, stood there. "I'm Charles Lindbergh." MacDonald's hand froze mid-air, suspended halfway to a checker piece. The legendary name reverberated in the confined space, hanging heavy like the lingering smoke from a downed aircraft. Smith's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, but MacDonald found himself scrutinizing this surprisingly ordinary-looking civilian, struggling to reconcile the monumental legend with the unassuming man now standing before them. "That Charles Lindbergh," he stammered, his voice laced with disbelief. "The one who completed the solo flight to Paris 17 years ago." "General Hutchinson dispatched me," Lindbergh calmly elaborated, stepping further into their cramped dwelling. "He believed I might offer some valuable insights into P-38 combat operations." MacDonald slowly rose to his feet, the checker game now utterly forgotten. At the youthful age of 29, he commanded the distinguished 475th Fighter Group. Yet he had grown up devouring accounts of Lindbergh's epical Atlantic crossing. For every aspiring pilot across America, the Spirit of St. Louis represented far more than a mere chapter in aviation history. It symbolized the pivotal moment, flying transcended from daring circus stunts into a legitimate and transformative mode of transportation. And now, that very same pioneering aviator stood within their tent, seeking information about their grueling daily reality of flying perilous missions across the immense expanse of the Pacific. "Of course, Mr. Lindbergh. Please, do sit down." MacDonald gestured courteously toward a nearby folding chair, then promptly summoned Colonel Warren Lewis. If the discussion was to delve into the intricacies of P-38 operations, Lewis's presence was absolutely imperative. As the commanding officer of the 403rd Fighter Squadron, Lewis possessed an unparalleled understanding of the grim, unforgiving mathematics that defined their current operational predicament. Lewis arrived within a matter of minutes, his flight suit still clinging damply to his frame, testament to the morning's intense briefing session. He cast a quick glance at their unexpected visitor, and his customary professional composure visibly wavered, cracking ever so slightly. "Mr. Lindbergh, what auspicious occasion brings you to our humble corner of paradise?" The profound irony of the term paradise was not lost on any of them. Paradise. If such a designation encompassed blistering metal hangars baking mercilessly under the tropical sun, an ever-present clinging mud that stubbornly refused to dry, and the relentless, irritating hum of insects that seemed utterly impervious to every potent repellent the quartermaster could possibly supply. Nevertheless, Lewis's inquiry was genuinely heartfelt. What could the world's most celebrated aviator possibly desire concerning their fighter operations? "I am here to absorb knowledge," Lindbergh responded with characteristic simplicity, "and perhaps to contribute some observations regarding the demanding art of long-range aerial navigation." Lewis settled into another folding chair, and MacDonald keenly observed him mentally transitioning into his professional briefing persona. "Well, Mr. Lindbergh, our operational situation is, to put it mildly, quite unambiguous. We are consistently flying missions that push every conceivable limit these aircraft possess." The colonel produced a well-worn map from his desk, unfurling it across MacDonald's workspace, and unceremoniously sweeping the checkerboard aside. His finger meticulously traced the arduous routes across hundreds of miles of deep blue Pacific water, routes dotted with minuscule islands that, while appearing utterly insignificant on paper, represented critical life-or-death navigation points for pilots flying in solitary isolation over the seemingly endless ocean. 6.5 to 7 hours, Lewis continued, his voice adopting the measured, almost weary tone of someone who had calculated these grim figures countless times over. That is the immense burden we are now placing upon these young men. Missions that were considered utterly unfeasible just a year ago are now becoming alarmingly routine. And the fuel margins. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of profound resignation. MacDonald watched Lindbergh scrutinize the map with the intense focus of an engineer meticulously examining complex blueprints. Those remarkably pale blue eyes moved with systematic precision from one island to the next, silently calculating distances with the unwavering accuracy of an individual who had dedicated decades to contemplating the critical concepts of range and endurance. It was the unmistakable gaze of a pilot who intuitively understood that fuel was not merely a numerical value on a gauge. It represented time in the air, the achievable distance, and ultimately the very essence of survival. The P-38L model boasts a published combat radius of 570 miles, Lewis elaborated. However, in practical terms, we are routinely pushing that operational envelope to its absolute maximum on every single mission. Standard operating procedure dictates engine settings of 2,200 to 2,400 RPM, coupled with auto-rich mixture settings. This results in a staggering total fuel consumption exceeding 100 gallons per hour. Lindbergh nodded slowly, deliberately, but MacDonald discerned something profound in his expression. Not confusion or bewilderment, but rather a deep-seated recognition, akin to a seasoned mechanic immediately identifying symptoms he had encountered and expertly diagnosed on numerous prior occasions. "These boys return utterly spent," Lewis continued, his voice tinged with empathy. 7 grueling hours confined within that cockpit is nothing short of sheer torture. They are literally sitting upon a parachute, an emergency raft, and an oar. The physical strain is undoubtedly immense, but the mental pressure. He gestured once more toward the map, his hand sweeping across the vast ocean. Every single mission brief devolves into an agonizing fuel calculation. How much reserve capacity do we truly possess? For how long can we realistically remain over the target? What constitutes our absolute unassailable point of no return? Is this the absolute point of no return for our aircraft? MacDonald had personally witnessed the immense pressure weighing on young pilots. Some barely past their 20th birthday, as they hunched over flight planning tables. With only slide rules and pencils, they meticulously calculated the critical fuel margins that would determine whether they would live to see another dawn. Far too many courageous men had already perished due to empty fuel tanks rather than the enemy's bullets. The stark reality of the mathematics was unforgiving. Running out of fuel over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean meant that rescue was, at best, a remote possibility. "Indeed, the situation is deteriorating," Lewis quietly added, his voice laced with concern. "Our targets are progressively shifting further afield. We began with locations like Rabaul and Wewak, but now we are contemplating missions deep within the Philippine archipelago. The war effort is undeniably pushing westward, yet our aircraft's intrinsic fuel capacity remains stubbornly stagnant, failing to evolve with the changing strategic demands." Lindbergh absorbed their words without interruption, interjecting only occasionally with pointed inquiries regarding specific parameters such as mixture settings, propeller pitch, or optimal cruise altitudes. His questions were remarkably precise and technical, revealing an astonishing depth of knowledge concerning aircraft systems that genuinely surprised MacDonald. It became clear that this was no mere celebrity posing polite, superficial questions. This was a seasoned aviator who possessed an understanding of power plant management at a sophisticated level rarely attained by the majority of combat flyers. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please leave a comment below about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Have you explored the efficacy of employing diverse cruise configurations? Lindbergh eventually inquired. Lewis and MacDonald exchanged a quick, knowing glance. The technical directives are quite explicit, Lewis responded with measured caution. We strictly adhere to established protocols for engine management, which mandate high RPM and rich fuel mixtures. These are the prescribed conditions believed to be essential for maintaining the operational integrity of these Allison engines. An almost imperceptible shift occurred in Lindbergh's expression. It wasn't precisely disagreement, but rather the look of an individual who had just encountered conventional wisdom that starkly diverged from his own extensive practical experience. Mr. Lindbergh, MacDonald began, slowly, his curiosity piqued. You alluded to certain observations concerning long-range flight. Could you elaborate on the nature of these observations? For the first time since his arrival in their quarters, a faint smile touched Lindbergh's lips. Would you be amenable to witnessing a practical demonstration? I completed my checkout in the P-38 a few days prior, flying Dick Bong's former aircraft to this very base. I would be honored to join one of your combat missions. The extraordinary request hung heavy in the humid air between the three men. MacDonald felt the profound weight of his command settle upon his shoulders. Permitting a civilian, even one as globally renowned as Charles Lindbergh, to participate in active combat operations carried inherent risks that extended far beyond the usual parameters of any mission. Nevertheless, there was an unmistakable, quiet confidence radiating from the man that suggested this was no idle curiosity, but a matter of serious intent. What precisely did you have in mind? MacDonald finally asked, his voice betraying a hint of intrigue. The recreation hall at Hollandia had undeniably seen more prosperous days, though MacDonald struggled to recall precisely when. Its dirt floors, compacted hard by months of relentless foot traffic, and a palm thatch roof that offered little resistance to the persistent afternoon rains, spoke volumes of its neglect. A solitary ping-pong table served as the squadron's primary source of diversion when they were not engaged in flying missions or performing critical aircraft maintenance. Unshaded light bulbs dangled precariously from the rafters, casting stark, unforgiving shadows that seemed to prematurely age and weary every face in the room. MacDonald positioned himself near the makeshift podium, which was, in reality, nothing more than a wooden crate turned on its end, and surveyed the assembled pilots of the 475th Fighter Group. There were 43 men present, most of them under the age of 25, all exhibiting the telltale 1,000-yard stare, a vacant gaze born of countless hours spent over hostile territory, with their minds perpetually fixated on dwindling fuel gauges. Some had perched themselves on folding chairs, scavenged from various supply depots, while others sat cross-legged on the hard floor. A few leaned casually against the walls, their arms folded, observing the scene. "Gentlemen," MacDonald began, his voice cutting authoritatively through the low murmur of conversation that permeated the hall. "Mr. Lindbergh has some insights he wishes to impart regarding methods for significantly extending our operational range capabilities." Lindbergh then stepped forward, his movements imbued with the measured confidence of someone long accustomed to addressing skeptical audiences. He wore the same navy khakis from their meeting 2 days prior, though MacDonald now noticed the subtle, distinguishing details that set him apart from standard military personnel. the civilian watch adorning his wrist, the conspicuous absence of regulation insignia, and the inherent grace with which he carried himself, characteristic of an individual who had spent decades immersed in the world of aviation. "Reduce your standard 2,200 RPM to 600, Lindbergh stated, without any preliminary remarks or contextual softening. There was no warm-up, no preamble, merely a direct technical specification that held the potential to either save lives or catastrophically destroy engines. Adjust fuel mixtures to auto-lean instead of auto-rich. Incrementally increase manifold pressures to compensate for these changes." The ensuing silence was of a particular quality MacDonald recognized. Not one of simple confusion, but rather the audible mental grinding of pilots desperately attempting to reconcile what they had just heard with every fundamental principle they had ever been taught about engine operation. Lieutenant Bobby Johnson, one of the squadron's most consistently steady formation leaders, tentatively raised his hand. "Sir, are you suggesting we can reduce RPM to 2,600 and concurrently utilize 30 inches of mercury manifold pressure?" "That is correct," Lindbergh affirmed. "The calculated fuel savings range between 50 and 100 gallons per mission, contingent upon prevailing conditions and the overall duration of the flight." The silence in the hall deepened, becoming almost palpable. MacDonald closely observed the myriad expressions on his pilots' faces, discerning a complex blend of hope and profound horror playing across their features. Hope, because a greater operational range translated directly into enhanced survival odds, increased tactical flexibility, and the long-sought ability to reach targets that had previously been considered beyond their operational grasp. Horror, conversely, because every flight instructor, every technical manual, and every engine school they had ever attended had drilled into them the same immutable principle: never, under any circumstances, run an engine over square, meaning never operate with manifold pressure exceeding RPM. Captain Jim Watkins articulated the collective apprehension that permeated the room. "Mr. Lindbergh, that operational setting will undoubtedly burn up our engines. We have always been unequivocally instructed that a combination of low RPM with high manifold pressure inevitably leads to detonation." "You have been misinformed," Lindbergh interjected, his voice carrying the quiet, unwavering authority of absolute certainty. "The technique is effective precisely because you are maintaining a high manifold pressure while simultaneously reducing RPM, not operating both parameters at elevated levels concurrently. When this approach is combined with auto-lean mixture settings, as opposed to auto-rich, it results in a total fuel consumption of approximately 70 gallons per hour." Lieutenant Thomas Hayes, a youthful aviator barely 22 years old, and still radiating the eager intensity of someone who had graduated from flight school just 6 months prior, swiftly performed the necessary calculations aloud. 70 gallons per hour versus our current rate of over 100 gallons. That represents an astonishing reduction of almost 30%. "Not 100 plus. That's almost a 30% reduction," the voice stated. Charles Lindbergh, with an air of quiet authority, countered, "More than that, in fact. When operating at an indicated airspeed of 185 miles per hour, this particular technique yields approximately 6 miles per gallon. This significantly expands your combat radius, pushing it from a baseline of 570 miles to a formidable 700, potentially even 750 miles, contingent upon prevailing atmospheric and operational conditions." These startling figures hung palpably in the heavy, humid atmosphere, resonating with the force of impending ordnance. Commander MacDonald observed his squadron pilots, their minds visibly engaged in rapid mental computations, striving to fully comprehend the profound implications of these statistics in a practical combat scenario. A potential 750-mile operational range unlocked the possibility of missions previously deemed unfeasible. Deep penetration strikes into Japanese-controlled territories, targets that had until now remained frustratingly beyond their aircraft's effective fuel envelope. Yet, the reluctance among the airmen extended beyond mere mathematical calculations. These seasoned warriors had honed their survival instincts by rigidly adhering to established flight protocols, procedures meticulously designed to ensure engine reliability and sustained flight. The Allison V-1710 engines powering their P-38 Lightnings were notoriously temperamental, even under optimal circumstances. Therefore, any deviation from their customary cruise settings felt akin to staking their very lives on a perilous gamble. "Sir," interjected Major Pete Peterson, a distinguished veteran whose skepticism was hard-earned through numerous harrowing missions over Rabaul. "Every technical directive we have ever consulted explicitly cautions against over-square engine operation, citing the grave risks of engine knock and subsequent piston damage." Lindbergh responded with an unruffled patience. "The procedure may indeed appear contentious, because you have been rigorously trained to believe it would compromise engine integrity. However, I urge you to critically examine the origins of that training. How many of your instructors possessed extensive practical experience with sustained, long-range cruise flight? Furthermore, how many among them had operated these precise power plants under the exacting demands of extended endurance conditions?" Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Lindbergh's probing inquiry pierced directly to the core of their predicament. Conventional military flight instruction predominantly emphasized aggressive combat maneuvering, intricate formation flying, and precision gunnery skills, rather than the refined, fuel-efficient, long-range cruise methodologies that Lindbergh had meticulously cultivated over his many decades in civilian aviation. The existing technical orders, predominantly drafted by engineering teams, inherently prioritized engine longevity and reliability, above maximizing operational range, erroneously presuming that a fixed fuel capacity rather than optimized consumption would invariably dictate mission parameters. Lieutenant Colonel Smith, who had maintained a quiet presence throughout Lindbergh's detailed exposition, finally broke his silence. "Mr. Lindbergh, you are proposing that we undertake missions lasting 9 hours. Already, 7 hours confined within the cockpit of a Lightning is an agonizing ordeal. We are forced to sit on cumbersome emergency equipment, constantly contend with the idiosyncrasies of our oxygen systems, and battle the insidious onset of fatigue that inevitably impairs critical judgment." He gestured pointedly towards the assembled pilots, his voice conveying the weight of their collective experience. 9 hours truly seems to transcend the very limits of human endurance. MacDonald offered a grim nod, acknowledging the undeniable reality of these formidable physical challenges. The P-38 cockpits were notoriously restrictive even in the most favorable conditions, and protracted missions necessitated enduring hours perched upon parachutes, inflatable emergency rafts, and an array of survival gear. Oxygen masks, essential for high-altitude flight, became progressively more uncomfortable, chafing and irritating the skin. Radio headsets, while vital for communication, created painful pressure points. Beyond the physical discomfort, the relentless mental strain of navigating over vast, featureless oceanic expanses gradually eroded the resilience of even the most seasoned and experienced pilots. The challenge of human endurance is undeniably legitimate, Lindbergh conceded, his tone empathetic yet firm. However, I implore you to consider the stark alternative. How many of your brave pilots have tragically perished due to fuel starvation? How many critical missions have been prematurely terminated because inadequate fuel margins precluded sufficient time over the target area? The gravity of Lindbergh's questions resonated deeply with every aviator in the room, for each man intimately knew the tragic answers. Far too many valiant comrades had vanished without a trace over the immense Pacific, their aircraft simply disappearing when their fuel supplies dwindled hundreds of miles from any landmass. Others had been compelled to abandon their objectives prematurely, allowing enemy strongholds and installations to remain operational, unmolested, due to an insufficient fuel allowance to complete their intended attacks. The fundamental choice before us is not merely between comfort and discomfort, Lindbergh continued, his voice dropping to a quiet, persuasive tone. It is rather a critical decision between deploying proven techniques that demonstrably expand your operational capabilities and clinging to conventional methodologies that may be needlessly restricting your combat effectiveness. MacDonald thoughtfully surveyed the faces of the pilots gathered before him, discerning a complex interplay of curiosity and profound concern etched into their expressions. These were battle-hardened veterans who had, through countless engagements, learned to place implicit trust in their equipment and their rigorous training. Yet, they were also pragmatic individuals who inherently understood that survival in their perilous profession frequently hinged upon their capacity to adapt to novel information and innovative approaches. "Mr. Lindbergh," MacDonald finally uttered, his voice decisive, "would you be prepared to personally demonstrate this technique on an actual combat mission?" The morning of July 3rd broke with pristine clarity over Hollandia, offering expansive visibility that stretched unimpeded to the horizon for the first time in a week. MacDonald stood vigilantly beside his P-38 Lightning at 0530 hours, observing the meticulous pre-flight inspections being completed by the ground crews, as the tropical air still retained a lingering relative coolness from the pre-dawn hours. Today's mission was designed to rigorously test every assertion Lindbergh had made regarding advanced fuel management. A formidable 1,280-mile round trip that would inevitably push even the most conservative conventional fuel planning to its absolute perilous limits. Lindbergh emerged from the operations tent, carrying his flight gear with the measured, deliberate movements of an individual who had performed this ingrained ritual thousands of times over a lifetime of flying. His borrowed flight suit, though not custom-fitted, seemed to conform reasonably well, although MacDonald could not help but notice the distinct civilian flying boots he wore, a departure from the standard military issue. Even more telling was the effortless grace with which he handled his specialized equipment, the parachute harness, the Mae West life jacket, his oxygen mask, and the compact survival kit. each item arranged and secured with the innate efficiency born of extensive, practiced experience. Weather conditions appear optimal for the demonstration, Lindbergh remarked, his gaze sweeping towards the eastern horizon where the nascent sun was commencing its task of dispelling the lingering overnight haze. Visibility should remain unimpeded for navigational purposes, and wind conditions are presently minimal. MacDonald offered a brief nod, though his primary focus remained intensely fixed on the intricate fuel calculations he had painstakingly reviewed, no fewer than 3 times during the preceding night. Adhering to standard cruise settings would necessitate utilizing every single drop of the aircraft's internal fuel capacity, leaving virtually no reserve whatsoever for unforeseen combat maneuvering or the potential encounter with unexpected headwinds. Should Lindbergh's innovative technique fail to deliver its promised fuel savings, they would find themselves in the grim position of calculating desperate glide ratios over the vast, unforgiving expanse of the open ocean. "Tommy will be flying your wing today," MacDonald announced, indicating Major Thomas McGuire, who was diligently completing his own pre-flight inspection 2 aircraft down the flight line. "He will be meticulously monitoring your fuel consumption throughout the mission." McGuire, America's second-highest scoring ace, looked up briefly at the mention of his name, offering a concise wave. He had specifically volunteered for this perilous mission to personally observe Lindbergh's advanced methods under authentic combat conditions. The logic was clear. If this revolutionary fuel management technique proved effective for an aviator of McGuire's characteristically aggressive flying style, it would undoubtedly prove viable for every pilot within the squadron. The initial operational briefing outlined a mission that appeared routine at first glance, yet held significant challenges for every pilot within the squadron. Their directive was to thoroughly patrol specific sectors situated to the northeast of their current base, with the added prospect of engaging in ground attack maneuvers against various Japanese logistical strongholds dispersed across several diminutive islands. While such assignments had become relatively commonplace in their recent operational history, the considerable distance designated for this particular sortie was poised to rigorously examine the aircraft's fuel economy capabilities and, perhaps more critically, the pilot's sustained physical and mental resilience. With an air of seasoned expertise, Lindbergh ascended into the confines of his cockpit, executing each maneuver with remarkable economy and pinpoint accuracy. From his vantage point, MacDonald meticulously observed the civilian aviator as he meticulously progressed through his pre-flight checklist. It was evident that Lindbergh devoted an unusually extended period to fine-tuning the intricate configurations of the fuel system. Diverging sharply from the established protocols of military aviation, Lindbergh deliberately positioned his mixture controls to an auto-lean setting, even prior to initiating engine ignition. Furthermore, his propeller controls were calibrated for a significantly reduced revolutions per minute (RPM) output, a setting far below the operational parameters that any P-38 pilot had ever been instructed or accustomed to employing. The ignition sequence of the engines unfolded without incident, the twin Allison V1710 power plants awakening with their distinctive high-pitched whine as their turbo superchargers progressively accelerated to optimal operational velocity. However, the moment taxi clearance was granted, MacDonald's keen senses instantly registered a marked divergence. Lindbergh's engines, in stark contrast to the typical roar, operated with a distinctly lower acoustic profile. Their exhaust emanated a deeper, more subdued hum devoid of the customary aggressive resonance. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. We invite you to leave a comment below, sharing where you are from and what you think about the fascinating topic discussed in this video. Hollandia Tower. This is Lightning Flight. Requesting permission for takeoff, McDonald articulated over the radio, his voice clear and concise. The response from the control tower was prompt and authoritative. Lightning Flight, you are cleared for takeoff. Utilize runway 27. Current meteorological conditions report a calm wind and unlimited visibility. In a synchronized display of aerial prowess, the quartet of P-38 Lightnings gracefully ascended from the runway, maintaining a precise formation as they steadily climbed through an altitude of 3,000 feet. Their collective trajectory set northeastward towards their designated patrol zone. McDonald, adhering strictly to established operational guidelines, maintained his throttles and mixture controls at their prescribed regulation settings. Concurrently, his gaze remained fixed upon Lindbergh's aircraft, which held its position steadfastly on his right wing. Even during the ascent phase, McDonald discerned that Lindbergh's engines, despite their notably unconventional configurations, seemed to be generating an identical output of power. A truly remarkable observation. Upon reaching their designated cruise altitude, the practical demonstration of Lindbergh's innovative techniques commenced in earnest. His voice, imbued with a distinct technical exactitude, resonated through the radio. I am now reducing RPM to 1/600, setting manifold pressure to 30 inches, mixture to auto lean, and maintaining an indicated airspeed of 185. McDonald immediately cross-referenced these parameters with his own aircraft's instrumentation. His P-38 was, as anticipated, consuming aviation fuel at the projected rate of approximately 52 gallons per hour per engine, culminating in a total of 104 gallons hourly. Yet, a direct visual assessment strongly indicated that Lindbergh's aircraft was effortlessly sustaining an identical airspeed and altitude, notwithstanding its fundamentally distinct and unconventional engine calibrations. The initial hour of the mission unfolded without incident, with navigation progressing precisely according to the pre-flight plan. McDonald, however, found himself consulting his fuel flow instruments with an unusual frequency, meticulously contrasting his own rates of consumption against the stringent calculations outlined in the mission planning. While his own performance aligned perfectly with expectations, this meticulous comparison only served to underscore the growing significance of Lindbergh's assertions. Should the civilian pilot genuinely be realizing a remarkable 30% reduction in fuel consumption while concurrently preserving optimal cruise performance, the ramifications for the extensive and demanding operations across the Pacific theater would be nothing short of revolutionary. Precisely at the 1 hour and 30-minute mark of their flight, McGuire's voice pierced the ambient radio silence with an unexpected transmission. Lead. My instruments indicate a fuel flow approximately 20% below the normal rate for this specific phase of our flight. This unsolicited report conclusively corroborated the burgeoning suspicions that McDonald had already begun to harbor. It became evident that even McGuire, while ostensibly operating his aircraft under standard cruise settings, had, through the mere act of closely observing Lindbergh's highly efficient technique, unconsciously begun to implement more optimized power management strategies. The profound psychological impact of witnessing such demonstrable fuel conservation in real time was subtly yet effectively reshaping the flying habits of the entire formation. As the mission progressed into its second hour, the squadron encountered its inaugural tactical engagement. Earlier intelligence dispatches had suggested the potential presence of Japanese barge movements in the vicinity of Samate Island, and indeed, subsequent visual reconnaissance unequivocally verified the existence of multiple enemy targets securely moored within a sheltered cove. Conventional attack protocols mandated a series of rapid, high-speed passes executed at maximum power settings, precisely the sort of fuel-guzzling aerial maneuvers that inherently complicated the execution of extended-range missions. Lightning Flight, this is lead. The target area lies directly ahead. Prepare yourselves for a ground attack, MacDonald commanded, his voice firm with resolve. With a decisive motion, MacDonald advanced his throttles, instantly perceiving the surge of augmented power from both engines as the fuel flow swiftly escalated to its peak combat settings. The ensuing attack run unfolded in accordance with established tactical doctrine, encompassing exhilarating diving approaches, a succession of relentless strafing passes, and agile defensive maneuvers expertly executed to evade the persistent anti-aircraft fire. Throughout the intense engagement, MacDonald observed that Lindbergh meticulously upheld his position within the formation, his aircraft exhibiting a perfectly normal and responsive performance to the rigorous demands of combat power, even in spite of its previously unconventional cruise configuration. The skirmish endured for a total of 12 minutes, during which all four aircraft expended a considerable quantity of ammunition against the Japanese barges and fortified shore installations. As they ascended back towards their designated cruise altitude, MacDonald diligently reconfigured his engines to their standard long-range settings, simultaneously keeping a watchful eye on his remaining fuel reserves. The intense combat power expenditure had, as anticipated, consumed fuel at its projected rates, consequently leaving him with roughly 60% of his total fuel capacity available for the arduous return journey. Lead, I'm initiating a fuel check, MacDonald communicated over the intercom, prompting a series of responses from his wingmen. 2 reporting 60% remaining, McGuire's voice chimed in. 3, I show 58%, the third pilot confirmed. Then, with a distinct understated tone, Lindbergh calmly stated, 4, I have 72% remaining. MacDonald, incredulous, instinctively double-checked his radio settings, convinced that he must have misinterpreted the transmission. 72%, he murmured to himself. The sheer improbability of the figure was astounding. After 2 full hours of sustained cruise flight and an additional 12 minutes of strenuous combat maneuvering, Lindbergh's aircraft still retained nearly 3/4 of its original fuel load. Such figures were utterly irreconcilable with every principle MacDonald had ever learned or understood regarding the P-38's fuel consumption characteristics. Could you please repeat your fuel remaining figure? MacDonald pressed, seeking absolute clarification. 72% confirmed, Lindbergh reiterated with unwavering certainty. He then added a crucial detail. My fuel flow during the cruise phase has consistently averaged approximately 70 gallons per hour in total. The numerical evidence presented an undeniable truth, compelling and irrefutable. Whereas McDonald's own aircraft had depleted an estimated 200 gallons of fuel during the initial segment of their mission, Lindbergh's P-38 had utilized a mere 140 gallons to cover the exact same distance and duration of flight. This remarkable 30% decrease in consumption precisely mirrored the savings Lindbergh had confidently projected during the pre-mission briefing. However, witnessing such efficiency not merely in theory, but vividly demonstrated and sustained even under the rigorous demands of actual combat conditions, unequivocally elevated what were once mere theoretical possibilities into a tangible, operational reality. The subsequent return leg of their journey served to furnish even further compelling confirmation of Lindbergh's extraordinary fuel management techniques. Throughout the entire flight back, despite meticulously maintaining the prescribed formation airspeed and altitude, Lindbergh's aircraft consistently exhibited a significantly reduced rate of fuel consumption compared to the standard parameters for cruise settings. By the time the familiar outlines of Hollandia Airfield emerged on the horizon, McDonald found himself mentally calculating fuel reserves that, in stark contrast to their typically stringent and often precarious mission planning, now appeared almost lavishly abundant. The successful landing clearly showcased the profound impact of the demonstration. As soon as the aircraft touched down, vigilant ground crews immediately commenced meticulous fuel measurements, employing precisely calibrated dipsticks to ascertain the exact consumption for each fighter. Colonel McDonald's P-38 returned with a remaining fuel reserve of 18%, a quantity deemed sufficient for mission completion, but offering a minimal buffer against any unforeseen exigencies or extended operational requirements. In stark contrast, Lindbergh emerged from his cockpit, his Lightning still holding a substantial 34% of its fuel capacity. This significant disparity immediately signaled the efficacy of his unorthodox techniques, prompting initial whispers of surprise among the technical personnel. The initial fissures in the pervasive skepticism first appeared among the seasoned ground crews. Technical Sergeant Mike Kowalski, a veteran who had diligently serviced P-38 engines since the tumultuous period preceding Pearl Harbor, possessed an innate and profound understanding of fuel consumption, akin to a banker's intrinsic grasp of compound interest, a comprehension forged through daily, rigorous observation of empirical data that unequivocally revealed the truth. When Lindbergh's P-38, nicknamed the Lightning, consistently returned from its sorties displaying fuel readings that flatly contradicted every operational manual Kowalski had ever meticulously studied, the experienced mechanic felt compelled to initiate inquiries that courageously transcended the rigid confines of military hierarchy, challenging established norms with irrefutable evidence. "Colonel McDonald, sir," Kowalski articulated, with a directness born of conviction, following the 5th consecutive mission, where Lindbergh's aircraft exhibited a fuel consumption rate approximately 30% below the established standard operational figures. It appears this civilian either possesses engines imbued with some form of magical properties, or our collective understanding and instruction regarding optimal cruise settings have been fundamentally flawed all along. Colonel McDonald, witnessing the undeniable pattern, found himself assenting more and more frequently during these increasingly pointed discussions. The cumulative evidence was rapidly mounting with an undeniable mathematical precision that simply could not be dismissed out of hand or conveniently rationalized away. Mission after mission, Lindbergh's Lightning consistently returned with fuel quantities that, according to conventional wisdom, should have been utterly impossible given the vast distances traversed and the prolonged periods spent airborne. Even more significantly, detailed inspections of his engines revealed no discernible signs of the damage that entrenched military doctrine vehemently insisted would inevitably result from operating aircraft in an over-square configuration, further eroding the foundation of long-held beliefs. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The staunch resistance emanating from the pilot corps, however, proved considerably more intractable than the purely mechanical evidence. Lieutenant Hayes, who had bravely volunteered to experiment with Lindbergh's unconventional technique during a dedicated training flight, returned from his inaugural attempt visibly disquieted by the immense psychological burden of operating engines in configurations that fundamentally contradicted every principle he had meticulously assimilated throughout his extensive training. "It simply felt inherently wrong throughout the entire flight, sir," he soberly reported to Colonel MacDonald, conveying a palpable sense of unease, "as if I were constantly anticipating an imminent explosion." Yet, despite his profound psychological discomfort, Lieutenant Hayes also presented irrefutable data indicating a fuel consumption rate that almost precisely mirrored Lindbergh's audacious claims, a mere 73 gallons per hour in total, a stark contrast to his customary burn rate of over 100 gallons per hour. The aircraft's fuel gauges, impartial and objective instruments, remained entirely indifferent to his internal psychological turmoil. They merely recorded the undeniable mathematical reality of the significantly enhanced operational efficiency. Major Peterson epitomized the steadfast old guard's final, resolute stand against the adoption of this radical new technique. A seasoned veteran who had endured countless perilous missions over heavily fortified Japanese strongholds, Peterson's very survival was largely attributable to his unwavering adherence to established procedures, protocols that had reliably kept his aircraft aloft when other, more audacious pilots had pushed their luck beyond prudent limits. "Mr. Lindbergh," he asserted, during one particularly animated and contentious exchange within the operations tent, his voice laced with apprehension, "you are effectively asking us to wager our very lives on a set of techniques that directly contravene every established principle we currently understand about effective engine management." Lindbergh's measured response carried the composed and patient tone of an individual well accustomed to confronting technical skepticism. "Major, your current understanding of engine management stems from training specifically engineered for entirely different operational requirements. Typically, short-duration flights, maximum power settings, and the implementation of conservative safety margins, all of which are perfectly appropriate for conventional training environments." He then made a sweeping gesture towards the mission planning board, which was meticulously covered with intricate flight routes stretching for hundreds of miles across the vast, empty expanse of the ocean. These specific missions, however, unequivocally demand efficiency techniques that were simply not incorporated into the standard military curriculum. The pivotal breakthrough finally materialized during a critical mission to Wewak on July 28th. Colonel MacDonald had initially conceived the strike as a conventional formation attack targeting Japanese supply installations. However, updated intelligence reports subsequently indicated the strong likelihood of encountering heavy fighter opposition, precisely the kind of protracted and intense air-to-air combat that would rigorously test every conceivable aspect of aircraft performance under the most extreme and demanding conditions imaginable. Lindbergh, by prior arrangement, flew on Maguire's wing that momentous day, strategically positioning himself where the squadron's most experienced and battle-hardened combat pilot could meticulously observe his innovative techniques in the crucible of actual aerial combat. The intricate mission profile necessitated a substantial 400-mile transit to the designated target area, followed by the high probability of an air-to-air engagement, a subsequent ground attack phase, and finally, the arduous return flight, a quintessential example of a complex operational scenario where astute fuel management could unequivocally spell the difference between resounding mission success and catastrophic disaster. As intelligence had accurately predicted, they soon encountered Japanese aircraft, a formidable formation of Mitsubishi K-51 dive bombers, meticulously escorted by agile Zero fighters approaching Wewak from the northwest. The engagement commenced with standard tactical maneuvers, leveraging an initial altitude advantage, executing well-coordinated attacks, and employing aggressive maneuvering to secure advantageous firing positions. Yet, as the intense dogfight inexorably extended beyond its normal duration, fuel consumption rapidly escalated into a paramount and critical factor for every single pilot embroiled in the swirling aerial ballet. Colonel MacDonald observed the unfolding aerial combat with the cool, detached precision characteristic of a seasoned commander who had witnessed far too many similar engagements, P-38s gracefully maneuvering against their Japanese counterparts in what amounted to intricate three-dimensional chess matches, where instantaneous split-second decisions held the power to determine survival or demise. Ammunition expenditure, the relentless fuel burn rates, and the critical importance of tactical positioning all coalesced into complex calculations that pilots instinctively processed while simultaneously enduring multiple G-forces during violent combat turns. The Japanese formation leader, subsequently identified as the formidable Captain Saburo Shimada, exhibited the kind of exceptionally aggressive flying prowess that had deservedly cemented the legendary status of Zero pilots during the early, fierce years of the war. Shimada's aircraft carved through defensive maneuvers with a surgical precision that unmistakably suggested hundreds of accumulated combat hours, thereby compelling the American pilots to respond with maximum power settings that voraciously consumed fuel at rates far exceeding normal cruise consumption. Maguire's voice, strained but clear, crackled through the radio during a fleeting lull in the relentless engagement. Multiple bandits, ammunition running low, fuel becoming a factor, it was precisely the kind of perilous situation that served to delineate truly experienced combat pilots from those who had not yet fully mastered the art of managing a multitude of crisis factors simultaneously. Ammunition reserves, remaining fuel, the capabilities of enemy aircraft, the critical distance to base, and prevailing weather conditions all demanded immediate and precise evaluation, all while maintaining an unyielding situational awareness within the chaotic, three-dimensional combat arena. Lindbergh's aircraft, remarkably, maneuvered through the intense engagement with the very same precise and economical control he habitually demonstrated during routine cruise flight. An absolute absence of wasted motion, no unnecessary power settings, and a consistent, tactically astute positioning that unequivocally suggested a complete and utter comfort with the intricate handling characteristics of the P-38. When Shimada's now damaged aircraft veered directly towards Lindbergh in what appeared to be a desperate ramming attack, the civilian pilot's response was both immediate and decisively executed. The brief climactic engagement concluded with Shimada's aircraft spiraling uncontrollably towards the vast expanse of the ocean, leaving a telltale plume of smoke and scattered debris in its wake. A hostile aircraft, visibly damaged, plummeted from the sky, leaving a telltale plume of smoke and scattered fragments in its wake. This engagement marked Lindbergh's singular and unprecedented aerial triumph throughout the entire conflict. However, the true import of this achievement far surpassed the simple tally of a personal combat victory. What Lindbergh had conclusively demonstrated was the viability of fuel-conserving cruise methodologies, showing they in no way hindered a pilot's fighting prowess, provided the aviator possessed a comprehensive grasp of both meticulous engine operation and astute tactical maneuvers. The subsequent journey back to base offered irrefutable, definitive proof regarding the tangible benefits of these innovative flight procedures. Colonel MacDonald's squadron had been aloft for an impressive duration exceeding 8 hours, a period that included prolonged and intense combat maneuvering, often necessitating the utilization of maximum power settings. Under conventional fuel consumption protocols, the majority of pilots would typically find themselves mentally strategizing for dire emergency landing scenarios, or even contemplating the hazardous prospect of ditching their aircraft in the water, particularly if adverse headwinds intensified. Yet, contrary to such grim expectations, they safely touched down at Hollandia, their aircraft surprisingly retaining fuel reserves that bordered on the abundant, almost lavish in their generous quantity. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Upon landing, Colonel MacDonald noted his aircraft still possessed sufficient fuel to sustain flight for an additional hour. Similarly, Maguire, who had diligently experimented with adjusted cruise configurations for the entire duration of the mission, reported comparable fuel margins. However, it was Lindbergh's fuel gauges that displayed truly astonishing figures, indicating quantities that defied conventional understanding. Enough remaining fuel to power his aircraft for almost 2 more hours of air travel, a feat previously thought unattainable. Subsequent to their return, the meticulous post-flight inspections conducted by the diligent ground crews yielded highly encouraging findings. Their scrutiny uncovered an absolute absence of engine damage, no anomalous wear patterns whatsoever, and no mechanical malfunctions that might imply any detrimental consequences stemming from the controversial practice of oversquare operation. Indeed, Kowalski's comprehensive and detailed analysis of Lindbergh's specific engines astonishingly revealed a marginally reduced degree of wear compared to similar aircraft engines that had been operated under traditional standard settings. This compelling evidence strongly suggested that the adoption of highly efficient cruise techniques could in fact contribute to the prolongation of an engine's operational lifespan, rather than curtailing it as widely feared. News of this remarkable combat triumph disseminated throughout the ranks of the 475th Fighter Group, with the characteristic rapidity of all pivotal military intelligence. Lindbergh had unequivocally showcased superior fuel efficiency, even amidst the most arduous and rigorous operational circumstances imaginable. He had, moreover, conclusively proven the combat efficacy of these methods when pitted against skilled and seasoned enemy aviators, and perhaps most significantly, his aircraft returned with its engines in a condition that directly refuted every previous caution and apprehension concerning potential damage from over-square operation. That very evening, Major Peterson sought out Colonel MacDonald, his demeanor betraying the reluctant admiration of an individual whose ingrained professional skepticism had finally capitulated in the face of utterly undeniable evidence. "Colonel," he stated, his tone conveying a newfound conviction, "I respectfully request authorization to implement Mr. Lindbergh's innovative techniques during tomorrow's scheduled patrol mission." The metaphorical floodgates had, at last, burst open. Within an astonishingly brief period of just 1 week, every single pilot within the squadron enthusiastically engaged in trials, experimenting with lowered RPM settings and the implementation of auto-lean fuel mixtures. The ensuing outcomes mirrored Lindbergh's initial forecasts with remarkable, almost mathematical precision. A substantial 30% reduction in fuel consumption, significantly expanded operational range capabilities, and a complete absence of any mechanical issues that had not already been erroneously predicted by outdated and obsolete training doctrines. Colonel MacDonald profoundly understood that what they had collectively observed transcended a mere technical exhibition. They had, in fact, borne witness to the fundamental challenging and subsequent overturning of established institutional knowledge, propelled by irrefutable evidence that was simply too compelling to be either disregarded or dismissed. By August 1944, this profound transformation had reached its full fruition. What had initially originated as a contentious proposition from a lone civilian expert had now been universally adopted as standard operating procedure throughout every P-38 unit deployed in the vast Pacific theater of operations. Consequently, existing flight manuals underwent hurried revisions, technical orders were comprehensively rewritten, and even seasoned instructor pilots found themselves in the unprecedented position of imparting techniques that directly contravened the very principles they had assimilated during their own formative training. This institutional revolution had unfolded with astonishing swiftness, propelled forward by tangible results that military commanders found utterly impossible to overlook. Inside the bustling operations tent, Colonel MacDonald stood contemplative, his gaze fixed upon the intricate mission planning boards. These detailed schematics outlined flight paths that, only a few months prior, would have been deemed utterly unfeasible. The proposed routes now extended deep into hostile Japanese-held territories, encompassing ambitious 950-mile round trips to strategic locations like Balikpapan, prolonged surveillance patrols soaring over the expansive Celebes Sea, and complex escort missions designed to stretch the P-38's operational capabilities to extremes that, under previous military doctrine, had been dismissed as mere fantasy. The hard data articulated the complete narrative with an undeniable mathematical exactitude. The effective combat radius of the aircraft had dramatically expanded, surging from an original 570 miles to an impressive 750 miles. Concurrently, fuel consumption experienced a significant reduction of 30%, while the overall mission capability, measured in actual flight time, saw a remarkable increase of 40%. Colonel Lewis then approached, carrying the most recent operational reports. His countenance bore the unmistakable air of satisfaction characteristic of an officer whose complex tactical dilemmas had found resolution through an unforeseen and ingenious innovation. The 432nd Squadron successfully executed an 8-hour escort mission to Borneo yesterday, he announced, his voice conveying a quiet pride. The entire formation maintained its integrity, encountered no fuel-related emergencies, and returned with ample reserves for any necessary combat maneuvering over the designated target area. The profound implications of this achievement were not lost on Colonel MacDonald. Merely 4 months prior, the very concept of 8-hour missions had remained confined to theoretical discussions and speculative planning sessions. Now, however, these extended sorties had transitioned into routine operational procedures, which pilots approached with a newfound sense of assuredness and confidence, rather than the previous grim calculation born of desperate hope. The profound psychological shift among the flight crews paralleled the impressive technical advancements. No longer did these men meticulously calculate their fuel margins with the somber, fatalistic exactitude of individuals who braced themselves for an inevitable demise, adrift over an boundless ocean due to depleted fuel tanks. Technical Sergeant Kowalski had, somewhat unexpectedly, emerged as a leading authority on these novel operational procedures. He dedicated himself to instructing ground crews across the vast expanse of the Pacific Theater on the intricacies of optimal mixture settings and precise power management techniques, all meticulously designed to maximize fuel efficiency. His comprehensive maintenance reports consistently indicated engine conditions that not only met but frequently surpassed standard operational parameters, thereby conclusively refuting decades of entrenched warnings regarding the supposed detrimental effects of oversquare damage. Engines that have been operated utilizing Mr. Lindbergh's prescribed settings are in fact exhibiting a measurably reduced degree of wear compared to engines in similar aircraft that have consistently run at conventional standard cruise power, Kowalski conveyed during one of his routine maintenance briefings. He further elaborated, this outcome is attributable to several key factors, notably lower combustion temperatures, a significant reduction in overall mechanical stress, and enhanced fuel atomization, all of which collectively contribute to extending the engine's service life rather than prematurely curtailing it. This profound technical vindication transcended the mere mechanical validation of an innovative method. It forcefully suggested that deeply entrenched institutional knowledge, meticulously codified within training manuals and diligently perpetuated through successive generations of military instruction, could be fundamentally erroneous regarding even the most basic operational principles. The far-reaching implications of this discovery extended significantly beyond the immediate concerns of fuel consumption, delving into more profound questions concerning the very mechanisms by which military organizations assessed, integrated, and ultimately adopted novel information and methodologies. Lieutenant Hayes, who had rapidly become one of the squadron's most fervent and outspoken proponents of the newly adopted techniques, had personally logged an impressive record of over 200 flight hours, rigorously employing Lindbergh's innovative methods. His meticulously maintained logbook provided undeniable documentation of substantial fuel savings, which, when accumulated, translated directly into significant tactical advantages, demonstrably measurable in terms of enhanced combat effectiveness. "Sir," he conveyed to Colonel MacDonald during a post-mission debriefing, "yesterday's extensive patrol mission to Halmahera would have been utterly unattainable had we been operating under the conventional, outdated cruise settings. We successfully remained airborne for a remarkable 9 hours, engaged hostile enemy aircraft directly over our objective, and still managed to land with sufficient fuel reserves to sustain flight for an additional hour." The human element, remarkably, had demonstrated a capacity for adaptation that mirrored the advancements in technical systems. Aviators, initially apprehensive regarding the feasibility of 9-hour endurance missions, came to realize that the diminished engine noise and vibration resulting from lower RPM settings actually served to significantly alleviate weariness during such protracted flights. Concurrently, cockpit comfort experienced marked enhancements. Demands on the oxygen system continued to be well within operational parameters, and the psychological burden associated with precise fuel calculations receded to a tolerable degree. Major Maguire subsequently emerged as the foremost champion of this innovative technique among the cadre of combat pilots. His formidable reputation commanded considerable respect throughout the entire fighter community, and his unequivocal approval of Lindbergh's groundbreaking methods swayed numerous aviators across multiple squadrons. The antiquated approach to fuel management was proving detrimental to us, Maguire remarked during a convocation of squadron leaders. Not due to mechanical failures, but rather through self-imposed constraints that precluded us from engaging targets that ought to have been well within our operational capability. The broader strategic ramifications quickly manifested as mission planners grasped the reality that P-38 units could now strike objectives hitherto solely within the purview of longer-range bombers. Japanese installations that had formerly been inaccessible to fighter aircraft were unexpectedly brought within striking distance by formations capable of sustained flight for nearly 10 hours, complete with ample fuel reserves for subsequent combat operations. Consequently, the geopolitical equilibrium in the Pacific underwent a significant alteration, as American fighters acquired an extended operational radius that effectively matched the immense distances inherent in oceanic warfare. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. News of this remarkable advancement in fuel economy disseminated rapidly through informal conduits that linked aviators flying the P-38 Lightning across the entire expanse of the Pacific theater. Squadron commanders, stretching geographically from Australia to the Aleutians, initiated requests for comprehensive instructional sessions on these cruise techniques, which offered the prospect of expanding their functional reach. This unstructured web of discourse among fighter pilots proved capable of transmitting specialized knowledge with greater alacrity than official military channels. MacDonald, in turn, found himself inundated with inquiries from units situated as far away as the China-Burma-India theater, where P-38 pilots confronted analogous restrictions on operational radius over similarly formidable landscapes. The precise techniques that Lindbergh had so effectively demonstrated over Pacific waters proved to exhibit comparable efficacy over Himalayan peaks and Burmese jungles. thereby confirming that these fundamental fuel efficiency principles extended beyond particular theaters of engagement. By the latter part of 1944, training squadrons within the United States had systematically integrated the refined, long-range flight protocols into their conventional pedagogical frameworks. Recently qualified aviators arrived in Pacific combat units, already proficient in methodologies that their predecessors had acquired through perilous experimentation and costly mistakes over hostile territory. This organizational knowledge acquisition trajectory had been significantly accelerated, compressing months of arduous combat experience into mere weeks of systematic training. The quantifiable data proved irrefutable as field dispatches amassed. Pilot survival rates saw a discernible enhancement as incidents stemming from fuel scarcity diminished. Concurrently, the probability of mission accomplishment rose, as formations could now maintain presence above objectives for prolonged durations. Enemy installations hitherto safeguarded by remoteness were rendered susceptible to routine assaults by fighters capable of reaching them with adequate fuel reserves for sustained engagement. Lindbergh's exit from Hollandia in August 1944 signified the cessation of his immediate participation in Pacific operations, yet his profound technical contribution persisted in shaping operational efficacy throughout the remaining war years. He bequeathed a core group of aviators and support personnel who had internalized the tenets of efficient fuel utilization, principles that would subsequently form the bedrock of understanding for jet-powered aircraft development in the post-war era. The institutional lesson, moreover, transcended the realm of aeronautics, extending into more expansive inquiries concerning strategic military tenets and groundbreaking advancements. The P-38 fuel efficiency breakthrough had unequivocally proved that long-held beliefs, even when buttressed by comprehensive instructional regimens and extensive technical documentation, could be profoundly erroneous regarding basic operational principles. The rapidity with which novel methodologies supplanted entrenched practices suggested that armed forces could swiftly adjust when presented with incontrovertible proof. MacDonald's concluding mission report to higher headquarters articulated the profound shift in measurable terms that resonated immediately with high-level strategists. Combat radius was extended by an impressive 31%. Fuel consumption was reduced by a significant 30%. Mission duration capability witnessed a remarkable increase of 40%. These compelling numbers converted into discernible operational superiority that shaped the trajectory of aerial offensive strategies throughout the Pacific Theater and set foundational benchmarks for long-range fighter operations that would continue through conflicts such as the Korean War and beyond. The subtle yet transformative upheaval that originated from a singular civilian recommendation to try different engine settings had radically altered the operational paradigm for the United States' premier fighter platform in the world's largest theater of war. The underlying lesson was both simple and profound. Sometimes the experts are wrong, and sometimes saving fuel means winning battles.